Hello, this is Travis Ryan of the Elizabeth Hospice, and this presentation is going to explore my leadership project, transitioning my organization's social workers and chaplains from using laptops to iPads. The project goal is to implement more modern and dependable documentation tools. The best way to achieve that goal was to move from documenting on laptops to iPads equipped with cellular connectivity. For background, the unit of clinical staff that supports hospice patients and families is called the interdisciplinary team, and this specific project focused on the social worker and spiritual counselor disciplines. My primary resources for this project include myself, under the heading Travis, and my role was to strategize the training process, test the iPad's EHR application, and create training and support documentation. I had access to an on-site IT support technician that deployed iPads and Bluetooth keyboards to our clinicians. I had an education nurse that helped reserve training rooms and send meeting invites. And lastly, I had clinical champions to field test the EHR application and promote the project with their colleagues. An important leadership strategy I utilized was imagining and articulating a vision that I perceived was achievable and that benefited our stakeholders. I knew that for my project to be successful, it would take a high degree of technical skill and a large measure of commitment, and then consistently demonstrating that to my colleagues. Throughout this project, I needed to leverage different leadership styles. At times, I needed to act as an authoritarian because I possess a specialized skill set, and this project was on a tight timeline that did not allow for a long planning period. Typically, I prefer to deploy a democratic leadership style that allows input and buy-in from the project stakeholders. But one downside of the democratic process is that it can take extra time, and time was not on my side. There were also times when I needed to let my colleagues figure things out on their own and wait for them to approach me if they needed help. So there was a little bit of the laissez-faire approach sprinkled throughout this project. This project called for a plethora of leadership values. A handful of the leadership values I employed were practicing humility. And I did this throughout the process by conceding that I make mistakes and that I have a lot to learn. I embraced and drove innovation by providing newer tools and workflows that allowed my colleagues to work more effectively. I showed respect to my colleagues by valuing their time, appreciating the changes to the processes they are familiar with, and by anticipating the variance in skill with new technology. I demonstrated integrity and fostered transparency by identifying common goals and heavily incorporating the clinician's goals into my decision-making process. And then I tirelessly worked to address uncertainties as they arose. I promoted collaboration by recruiting committed project champions and effectively communicating to address their challenges, and then I recognized their courage. I've celebrated excellence throughout the implementation by encouraging my colleagues to persevere and then celebrating the unique challenges they have overcome. Some of the challenges we experienced during this project include organizational challenges. My organization has a lot of big, important projects occurring right now, so it was somewhat difficult to devote resources to my specific project. Another challenge is the on-site IT support technically works for an MSP or a managed service provider, and that impacted the degree of control I had over them. This is also a hospice program, where our clinical staff are scattered throughout the county, and that can impact the access that they have to me when technology issues arise. A few other challenges are that some staff have a lot of difficulty with change or trouble adapting to new technology. And there was also a fear of making a mistake, and that fear impacted some people's ability to move forward with the new process. Let's take a minute and review feedback from my peers. I had explicitly asked for honesty in an effort to use this project as a learning experience. And with that disclaimer being stated, I'm both pleased and disappointed with the feedback. I'm pleased because my efforts were acknowledged, but a little disappointed to not receive more constructive criticism. Although I put forth a strong effort, I'm not sure if I'm experiencing imposter syndrome and my peers are too polite to provide constructive criticism, or if they really feel I did an excellent job, or maybe some combination of the two. As I reflect on this project, transitioning social workers and spiritual counselors from laptops to iPads, I need to consider my role in the project's success. Was the project a success? Yes. Staff were provided more modern and dependable documentation tools. This was clearly a win. Did I demonstrate leadership values? Well, I'm clearly not a perfect person, but I approached this project with an open mind and a flexibility to adapt to colleagues' unique learning needs. And that benefited the project immensely. And I feel great about the time and effort I invested into this project. So what would I do differently? This is a difficult question because the primary challenges were related to organizational constraints. For example, I would have enjoyed having a colleague with an informatics background to exchange ideas with, or perhaps more bandwidth to follow up with my colleagues following their iPad training. But those were constraints that I don't have much control over at this time. A few lessons I learned throughout this project is that I, in fact, do possess leadership ability, and that I'm able to rally colleagues behind a shared vision, and that incorporating their best interests into my vision engendered a lot of trust and enthusiasm throughout this project. I learned that context plays an important role in leadership. Different environmental variables call for different leadership approaches. A few examples of environmental variables include primary and secondary goals, the resources available to the leader, and the stakeholders involved. Thank you for watching and listening to my presentation. I'd like to express gratitude to my colleagues at the Elizabeth Hospice for their trust and dedication throughout this project, as well as my classmates at the University of San Diego for all of your interest and your support.